Good afternoon, welcome to Training Tuesday. My name's James, coming to you live here from not so sunny and slightly cold Southampton today. So we're continuing our QuickQ month all the way through November, so you've got another QuickQ session with me today and also next week as well. And then our first session in December, we're going to actually be looking at migrating from QuickQ into MagicQ and how that transition works. So just a bit of a heads up there in the next few weeks. So this week we're looking at QuickQ for more theatre style programming, studio style programming, or sort of school education style programming. So we'll be focusing on more cue stacking, that sort of things. As ever, it's completely live, so please do feel free to ask questions in the chat, both here on Facebook and YouTube. We stream to both places. So hello to the usual faces out there. Tommy, Mario, who else have we got here? I can see a few on YouTube as well. So welcome along, thanks for joining us. So this week, we're talking about QuickQ, as I said, we're talking about using it for theatre, studio, etc. So without further ado, let's dive into the software on my laptop here. As you can see on my laptop here, I'm running the QuickQ Designer software. I've already got a pre-patched show. We've covered patching both in the first week this month and also a little recap with Chip last week as well. So we're not going to cover that again this week. If you did miss those sessions, please do go back and take a look at those. We also covered in our first session this month the basics of just recording a cue. So again, I'm not going to go over that in this session here. What I'm going to talk about then is start digging into some of the settings on the console and some of the defaults. So right now, if you start a new show on a QuickQ console, it will default you into live mode. So as we covered in our first week in QuickQ month, if I select, say, my 4 spots here, I switch them on, I go to color, and I put them in, say, red here, and I store a cue there on playback 10, and I put them, say, in green, and I store that there, and I put them then in blue, and I store that there. I have 3 cues on my playback. I clear my programmer and I run up that fader, and of course you can see what happens here. Well, it's made a stack. Now, why has it done that? Why is it a stack and not a chase? Well, the reason being, in your settings here, so if I click the burger menu and go to settings, you have 3 options of how the console runs. You have live mode, theatre mode, or studio mode. So if you're in live mode and you store more than 3 things onto a stack, it will default it normally to a chase. So you can see here as I run this one here, it chases through those cues, 1, 2, 3, like so. So if you're in live mode, which is our default, more than 1 cue on a playback, it will turn it into a chase. Now, you do have the option, as we covered in the first week, of double clicking on that chase, and you can click your change to cue stack button here. It turns it into a more theatre style cue stack of cues. So you might be wondering, well, what's the point in settings of me having these different modes? Well, we're going to unpick that today and have a little look at that. Live mode, yes, you can have normal theatre style cue stacks. When I toggle on theatre mode here, you can see that playback still stays the same. Actually, there's a slight difference now. When I bring this fader down versus if I'm in live mode and I bring it down, you can see it actually releases the stack. How do you know it's done that? Well, if I was to go and select my stack here and I put it in Q2, which is in green, you can see the lights are in green, but also I have a green banding box around Q2. When I bring the fader to 0, so the moment it actually goes to 0, you can see that banding box has reset back to the first cue, and it's what we've done called released the cue stack. So when I bring that cue stack back up again, it comes up in Q1. Doesn't matter where I was. Okay, I could be in Q3. Green banding box is on there, tells me I'm on Q3 here. Bring the fader down, it releases and jumps back to Q1. Now, if I now go to my settings and I change into theatre mode and I go here and I go to Q2, let's select and go to Q2. Well, there's a first change, isn't there? Because we lock the play button to always be on playback 1. We call that your theatre stack. But of course I can still go through my cues. I can use the play button in the window, or I could use my flash acts as go button, so use my button below. So you can see right now I'm in Q2, green box is on Q2, my lights are green as I stored in the cue. Now if I bring that fader down, you can see it stayed in Q2. And I bring it back up, it stayed in Q2 again. So in theatre mode, it doesn't actually release the stack when you bring the fader to 0. Bring the fader to 0, the stack is still active and it holds in that cue. The only thing I'm doing is actually bringing the intensity to 0. So think of it in like my moving lights. If I told the lights to be positioned out here, positioned out to the audience or something here, and then I released a cue stack, the lights are going to stay in that position. So if I bring the fader down, the lights are going to stay in that position. They're not going to go back to their default position. I can show you that here in Magic Cue now. So if I zoom into my Viz window, like so, and now I go and bring this fader down. Let's do something where I move the lights. So let's say I take these lights, I switch them on, I go to position and I tilt them up onto the back wall and to the side. So you can clearly see that here in the visualizer. If I record that as a cue there and I clear this off here, you can see the lights go back as they should normally because nothing is telling them to be used. Now, of course, my first cue that I recorded here, they were pointing straight down, not particularly helpful. But if I bring this fader up, the lights go into that position there, and I bring the fader down, you can see they've released. Okay, they've released those cues. Now I'm in theatre mode. You're asking why has that happened? Well, let's see what happens when I put a second cue on the fader. Okay, lights go up. I bring the fader down. They don't release. So when there's more than one cue on a playback in theatre mode, and I bring the fader down, you can see the lights have stayed in that position. It hasn't released the stack. It's just brought the intensity to 0. So it is a change. If I was to go back to live mode here and I bring the fader up and bring it down, it releases the stack. It resets me to the first cue and releases the lights. So be aware of that. If you're in theatre mode, it is changing how things might work on your playback. So bring the fader down, they've stayed there. So it's great in a theatre style situation or whatever your production might be. I want to bring that fader up, then I get asked for a blackout partway through, so bring the fader down. Don't bring the Grandmaster down because maybe I want some other stuff on. I just want to bring that cue stack fader down. My lights will stay there. So when I bring the fader up, they just come on in that position rather than them wiping and swiping up or me resetting the stack back to the first cue again. So there's one change. In theatre mode, the other change in theatre mode is that we turn playback 1 here into a theatre stack, which is just normal playback in theatre and cue timing, but playback 2 has turned into a crossfader. Now if you've never come across one of these before, let me show what happens. So if I turn on my spots here and I say okay, lights are there and they're in that colour there, and I record that there, and let's turn them to green and let's put them in a different position, let's say there. Let's not do that, let's go for there, that'll do, and I store that there, and then my next cue I'm going to tilt them down and I store that there. Now running this cue stack, so there's Q1 here. Of course I could use the go button, so I can press my play button and you can see it will play through those cues. What I now have is I have playback 2 as what's called our manual crossfader, which allows me to bring the fader up to fade in to my third cue. And then if I bring it down again, it's going to go back to Q1, to 2, to 3. So each time that fader moves from one to the other, it's going to go Q1, to 2, to 3, to 4, to 5, to 6, etc. And when it gets to the last cue, it will cycle back to the first cue again. So it's allowing you to do manual crossfades or transitions between cues. I can mix and match. So I could be in, say, this cue here, and I could decide actually I'm going to hit play, use the fade time of this cue stack. And then that one I want to crossfade it, and then hit play and use the fade time of the cue stack again. Absolutely, you can mix and match there. So there's two things you've got when you're in theatre mode. Now there's another thing that theatre mode introduces, which is something called move in dark or move when dark. It doesn't do that in live mode, so let me show you how this works as well. So I'm going to bring down my playback. Now note that there is a release button when you're in theatre mode, so I can select the stack and press release to release it. So I can select this one and release it, select this one and release it. You can tell they're released. The blue does change a slightly different colour and everything will reset back to the first cue again. So you can release stacks in theatre mode. That is possible to do. Move in dark though. So if you've not seen this before, so if I was to take my spots and switch them on, and in my first cue I'm going to have them here and I'm going to have them in red, and I'm going to store that there, and then I'm going to have another cue where they're in yellow and they're going to be over here. That's fine, that's my second cue. And now my third cue, I'm not going to use the spots. Okay, third cue, I'm not going to use them. I'm going to use some of these wash lights here instead, these 4 wash lights. I'm going to have them on, and I'm going to have them in a magenta colour, and I'm going to have them positioned over there, and I'm going to fan them just for fun. There we go. So I'm going to fan those out like so, and I'm going to store that as my Q3. And then Q4, I'm going to decide actually I want to use my spots again. So I'm going to take my spots and I'm going to switch them on, then I'm going to position them out into the crowd somewhere in the audience, and I'm going to fan the pan. There we go, like that. I'm going to put a colour in. I'm going to put them into, well, let's go for something a little bit different I've not used. So something like, we're looking a little bit blown out, my viz, aren't they? So let's go for a more saturated colour. Let's go for that sort of blue there. And I'm also going to drop a gobo in, why not? So let's drop that gobo in here. Can we see that in the viz? Yes, we can. You can see the beams change there. And I'm going to store that as a Q there on Q4. Now, I'm in theatre mode. So I run this Q stack. So there's, in fact, let's open the window. There's Q1. And then I'm going to press my flash axis go. So I'm going to make my flash button go into Q2. You can see nicely with a 3-second fade. Well, I have a default 3-second fade in theatre mode. And I'm going to go into Q3, which on come my spots here, off these go here. Now you can see my spots there have automatically preloaded. You saw them moving in the viz. So when I go into Q4 now, they're up and in position already. That's a change if I was in live mode. So if I now go back into settings and I go into live mode, and I run that Q stack, there's Q1 to 2 to 3, off go the spots. You'll see they're still in position here, and when I go to Q4 I get that wipe of them moving into position there. So another change, when you go into theatre mode, it auto turns on move in dark for my Q stack. So whenever some fixtures go dark, they will preload to where they're next used. Now, it doesn't matter if that's in 1 queue ahead or 10 queues ahead. You know, maybe I use the spots in Q1, then I don't use them until Q10. They will still have preloaded themselves. So before you get to Q10, they'll have preloaded and they'll be in position with the color, with the gobo, everything else ready to go. So we just come on where they're needed. So move in dark there. That is obviously a feature that exists in Magic Q. It is there in QuickQ in theatre mode. So you've got good number of little differences there in theatre mode. Now there's another mode which is called studio colour mixing, as you see here. So our library, our heads library, so all the different lights that we support in QuickQ and Magic Q, we build that heads library ourselves. So our team in Southampton and some of our remote team responsible for building head libraries. I see Tommy here as well. Thank you for your contributions there as well. So yeah, we build that head library ourselves. There's about 60 or 1,000 files in that library, and we put things like colour emitter data into that library. So there's lots of colour emitter data in there. So you'll notice, if I go to my home screen here, and let's bring down my playback that I'm running, and I'm going to go and select these Colorado paths. So I've got, let's say 5 of them there, and I switch them on. Now, if I go to my colour window, you can see on the faders here, I've got red, green, blue, white. Now, for my settings here, I have these options here for how does my colour picker work. So where it says use RGB emitters, use all emitters, or use studio colour mixing, this is talking about how our colour picker works and how we're picking colour on the console. So if I hit use RGB emitters only, and I go to my colour window, you'll see that it's only using the red, green and blue emitters. It's just turned white off. It's ignoring that white exists. So when I go to a pure white here, white's at 0. It's mixing the white using just red, green and blue. Now if I go to my settings here and I turn on use all emitters, you'll notice that when I go to colour, it now uses the white. So as I go to a nice white in the middle, you can see it's adjusting the red, green, blue and white, and it's using all emitters to mix my colour. Now this isn't the best example because it's just a red, green, blue, white RGBW fixture. Now if I was to patch something that had a few more emitters, so let's go for something like show they do a fixture called the Rev E3, and you can see that when it has this little colour symbol here, that means it's a head that we have colour emitter data for. So a little shortcut for you. In fact, it tells you here the colour control mode is additive colour because it's RGB whatever, it's not subtractive, it's not CMY, and it tells you calibrated, it's got colour emitter data. But if you see the little icon there, it tells you we have emitter data in our library. If you don't see that icon, we don't have the emitter data, you can still use it, it's just approximated. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to patch some of those in. It shows you that in the mode of the lights as well. So I just patched one of those in. Now if I select it and switch it on, it's in the middle of my room. I haven't positioned it now, but you can see this one has got red, green, blue, amber, mint in there. And as I move around my colour picker, you can see it's using all of those emitters to mix the colour. And it uses, if I pick a colour, let's say I pick this green, it will use the emitters to give me the brightest colour possible. Now, there's often when you have more than 3 emitters, there's multiple ways of mixing a colour. We will mix the brightest way possible for you. Okay? And if you go over to gels here, so in sort of theatre style programming, and pick a gel here, you'll notice the gel colours, you think, oh, maybe it doesn't quite look as I'd expect. Well, we essentially try and match the gel as if you had, say, an old school incandescent Source 4 style profile fixture with the gel on the front of it, because that's often what our theatre designers are still thinking of. When they say give me that colour, that's what they're thinking, not necessarily what the gel is. So heads up, that's what you see in this window here. And you can pick a colour and it will apply it using all emitters. So if I pick, say, Lee 71, go back to the colour picker here, you can see, well, it's actually mainly blue, a little bit of green in there, but it is using all of the emitters to make that colour. If I go for something that's maybe going to be a little bit more colour in there, you can see, there you go, this one here is using red, a bit of blue, it's using all the amber and mint, so it uses all of my emitters to mix that colour, even when I pick gels. So it's not just using the colour picker. When you pick gels, use all emitters. Now, there is this third mode, which is called Use Studio Colour Mixing, which, as it so happens, when you change it to Studio Mode, it will also use Studio Colour Mixing. I'll come back to Studio Mode in a moment. But using Studio Colour Mixing, well, you might ask, well, what's the difference? Well, if I go home and I go to the colour window, you will see some difference. The colour picker has changed a little bit. Well, for one, you now have a CIE colour chart here, and you can click between the two and swap and change between them. Where you see the CIE colour chart here, there's a few things going on here. Well, you can see these little triangles inside this colour chart. Well, first off, this is, if you've not heard of a CIE colour chart, do have a little Google on one of those and have a little read up. What we have inside here is we have some different triangles. The black triangle shows me what this fixture is capable of actually rendering. So if I was to click this green here, well, I'm afraid this particular light cannot render that shade of green. It can render, the closest it can get to is on the line there. So it cannot render that green, it can't render that blue over here. It can get the closest to would be on the black line there. So it's showing you what this fixture is capable of rendering. Now inside that you have a slightly lighter triangle, and this is my different colour spaces. So if I go to up the top here, I can pick different colour spaces. So this is more designed for TV studio work. So I could go into my sRGB/HD TV colour space, and you can see that triangle changes. In fact, I'm apologise to you. I think I lied to you all. The triangles I mentioned the wrong around. Black is the colour space. The light triangle is what the fixture is capable of doing. So apologies, I got that wrong there. So you have these triangles changing as I change my colour spaces. So it shows you what the fixture is capable of / what the colour space is there. Now the other thing you get in Studio Colour Mode is you get this sRGB colour option, which allows me to use either 0 to 255 or percentages or hex values for colour. So this is particularly useful. Okay, maybe take it out of the studio, take it into maybe a corporate show. You're using your QuickQ 20 or a QuickQ console on a corporate show, and someone comes up to you and says, hey, look, we're doing it for this brand here. This is our brand colour. This is the hex colour. Oh, cool. Okay, well, I can come to the software here and I can drop in their hex colour here and give them that colour. Or if actually they give you, okay, well, to make our brand colour, use this % of red, green and blue, and that will give you our brand colour. Cool, okay, I'll drop that in. Again, we'll use all emitters to mix that colour, and you've got their nice corporate colours in. So yeah, not just for studio mixing, could be useful for your corporate show or your theatre show. Actually, if maybe you're doing a production in your school and they're not thinking of gels, they're not used to Lee, Roscoe, whatever. They're thinking of just, well, give me this RGB colour. Okay, well, give me the thing, I'll punch it in and I can have that on the console, no problem. So it does give you other opportunities for mixing colour. You also get things like these faders here change. So you'll notice if I go out of Studio Colour Mixing mode and I go to all emitter mode and just recap there, come back here, you can see I now have here red, green, blue, amber, mint, and I have this value fader here, which doesn't actually really do anything at the moment. Now, if I go to settings and I go into Studio Color Mixing, and I go back to my color window here, you can see I have these 2 extra faders appear. What are they? Well, this one here is setting my white point. You can see that moving as I move up and down on the color chart here. You can see that sort of like shape here. So this is setting my default color temperature. So I can go default into white, and what color temperature I want. Well, let's go, I want 3200K as my default color white, and you can see I can mix color around there. And default back to white would give me that 3200K. So I can pick where I want my white point to be. Okay, I want a much cooler white, so I'm going to say, okay, I want 6500K, and you can see that's changed there, and I can mix my color there, default back to white at 6500K. What else have I got? Well, if I pick a color here and I bring this fader up and down, well, you can see it's a green shift. So you can see the green over here as I bring that fader up and down. Okay, I pick a color there, doesn't make a huge difference, but if I go for something like there and bring that up and down, you can see there goes my green shift in and out there. Okay, like so there. So Studio Color Mixing gives you a little bit more accurate color mixing or some different color options. Now, final thing to mention today, we have ignored studio mode so far. Now, if I turn into studio mode is designed for small sort of broadcast streaming sort of studios where, again, you've just got a simple operation. So if I go into studio mode like here, it will give me a warning. When you change to studio modes, this will cause cues and other data to be deleted from your show. So please, normally do save the show first. Why is it going to delete stuff? Well, if I change to studio mode, it changes your 10 playbacks, so they can only be single cue playbacks. You cannot have multi-cue stacks in studio mode. The idea being is, of course, you'd be a good program, you'd label up your cue stacks. It's very simple, just single cue color control for that small sort of streaming studio, a bit like very much, you know, our ChamSys video room here. A simple streaming studio with a little bit of maybe some accent lighting at the back, some key light and some backlight, and you just want a couple of faders. Okay, bring that on, etc. Single cue stacks. So that's what happens in studio mode. Really not designed for live work or for theatre programming, because you're going to limit yourself to single cues only. But in the studio environment, it's perfect. Single cues on a fader, nicely labeled up. It does what it says on the tin. No confusion there. If you change back to theatre mode, be careful. It doesn't bring back your cues. It gave you that warning when I changed. It does delete stuff when you come in and out of studio mode. So do save the show first and be aware of the use of studio mode. Studio color mixing is, of course, available when you are out of studio mode as well. So there you go. That's been our session for this week. You guys have been incredibly quiet on the chat this week. So either the chat's not working or you've all fallen asleep watching. I don't even know if there's been any questions coming in the chat. Just taking a look here. A few hellos from people in there. It's great to have you with us this week. YouTube, you've been very quiet. No questions at all on there. Thanks for joining us on there. Yeah, it doesn't look like we've got anything on Facebook as well. So thank you for joining us this week. As I say, next week we are continuing our QuickQ micro series. If you have any topics you'd like us to look at in our next session, final one for the month next week, please do post them up in the chat. Next week is the week to go off on tangent things. So if you'd like us to connect things to a console, look at other things, we're looking at QuickQ for installations. So we'll be looking at some third-party integrations for QuickQ next week. But anything else you'd like us to look at, can you do this on a QuickQ? How does this work? Please do chuck it in the chat now, and we'll make sure we take a look at that next week. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again on Tuesday next week.